picture 5-year-old soccer, right? The goal is very clear. Like, green team, put the ball in that goal. Red team, put the ball in that goal. Prevent the other team from doing the opposite. Go. And what happens? You get like 22 kids surrounding the ball, and it moves around. We call it beehive soccer, magnet ball. It has lots of funny names, and we've all seen it, right? That's when the what was super clear. Now, swap over to like Man City, who might be one of the most impressive teams over the last 5 years. Like, Pep Guardiola's coach, like, he has divided the field into like these different channels and different lanes. The expectation of every player is that there's only 2 people at any moment in any lane or any channel. And they know that they see 3, they have to move. They're trying to optimize this teeny tiny spot on the field called zone 16, where they're trying to put the ball as many times a game because that is the highest probability of scoring. It's the exact same what, but now you've got 11 players who all agree on the how. Like, they have the system, they know the role, they can play the position. It is very different. And that is the difference between being, 5-year-olds chasing the ball and being like the best football team in the world.
Is this thing on?
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Thank you, Fat Joe, and welcome to Run the Numbers, where I interview world-class CFOs, operators, and the investors who fund them on how to get the most out of your company's performance. This podcast is a playbook of sorts for ambitious people in the worlds of finance, strategy, and operations. Today, my guest is Dave Kline. He's a leadership coach who launched his own accelerator after working at Bridgewater Associates under Ray Dalio's management for a decade. Dave takes a refreshing approach to executive coaching, helping leaders identify and double down on their team's strengths while giving them the tools to properly communicate expectations. On this episode, we cover what it's like to receive 12,385 pieces of brutally honest feedback while working at Bridgewater, how incentives drive outcomes and the perils of title inflation at startups, how many Dennis Rodmans a company can have, and if the rules can be different for high performers, inverting those one-on-one meetings you dread and making them useful once again, and getting the monkey off your back when your coworkers put a burden on you to complete something. Dave has a unique view on high-performance cultures, coming from the investment and consulting worlds where people either live up to the lofty expectations of their managers or crumble under the pressure. He helps CEOs, CFOs, and anyone who manages people get their teams to act like owners of the business and feel empowered to make their own decisions. This episode is for anyone who's ever said, "That's okay, I'll just do it," to someone they managed, only to later realize that they robbed that employee of a development opportunity and lost valuable time in their own day that they would never get back again. All this and much, much more after a short word from our sponsors. As a SaaS CFO, I know firsthand how difficult it is to report on SaaS metrics. We've all seen a deal close at the end of the month, but the customer's contract doesn't actually start until the middle of the next month, creating the classic discrepancy between bookings or committed ARR and actual ARR, the real stuff. That's why I'm so pumped to be partnering with Maxio, a company trusted by thousands of SaaS companies to understand these reporting nuances. They basically built and automated the SaaS dashboard I tried to manually cobble together for 3 years. In 2022, SaaS Optics and Chargify combined to become Maxio, the only billing and financial operations platform that was purpose-built for B2B SaaS. They're helping SaaS finance teams automate billing and RevRec, manage collections and payments, and put together investor-grade reporting packages. Visit maxio.com/runthenumbers to learn how Maxio can help you supercharge financial operations in 2024. Request a demo using the Run the Numbers link and receive a 10% discount on your first year with Maxio. That's maxio.com/runthenumbers. If you're a startup founder or executive running a growing business, you know that as you scale, your systems break down and the cracks start to show. If this resonates with you, there are 3 numbers you need to know: 37,000, 25, and 1. 37,000. That's the number of businesses which have upgraded to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, streamlining accounting, financial management, inventory, HR, and more. 25. NetSuite turns 25 this year. That's 25 years of helping businesses do more with less, close their books in days, not weeks, and drive down costs. 1, because your business is one of a kind. So you get a customized solution for all your KPIs in one efficient system with one source of truth, manage risk, get reliable forecasts, and improve margins. Everything you need in one place. Right now, download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist designed to give you consistently excellent performance absolutely free at netsuite.com/metrics. Oh yeah, your boy loves metrics. That's netsuite.com/metrics to get your KPI checklist. That's netsuite.com/metrics. I really need this, guys. Please go to netsuite.com/metrics. Woo! Dave Kline, welcome to the Run the Numbers podcast. Thanks for joining me.
CJ, thanks for having me.
So, as a bit of background for our listeners, you worked with Ray Dalio at Bridgewater, and they have a culture very famous for unfiltered and perhaps overwhelming feedback. And so I read by the time you left Bridgewater, Dave, you had received 12,385 pieces of brutally honest feedback. Wow. I would be like a shell of a human if someone gave me that much feedback.
It is not for everybody. I ended up spending 10 years there. So at least it wasn't in like a 1 year.
Okay, it wasn't in like 1 week. It wasn't one bad week.
No. But for a lot of people, they were shells of humans after a week, because it wasn't just that you were getting the feedback. There was literally a tool that people had to record it. We had iPads back then. So you'd put it in your iPad, like, oh, CJ, he's really creative. Let me give him an 8 on creativity. But synthesis, tough synthesis, that's a 3. And you submit it. And it would go into a public Twitter feed of your feedback. So anybody could go check in on Dave Kline and see, like, how's his day going? Is he crushing all of his meetings, hitting his deliverables, or is he limping through this one?
Is the intention truly to get the best out of people, or is it partially to weed out the mentally weak people?
I think the intention was to get the best. There's questions about whether or not that implementation does that. I think the intention was, if we are consistently giving feedback, both positive and negative, and we could connect that back to attributes that people are like, well, then we could build this really rich tapestry that paints a picture of you. Like, I tend to be a pretty systematic problem solver, right? I can pull things apart in a good way. I don't tend to be particularly detailed and reliable, right? If you need me to run an operational thing where we have to show up at 9:01 every single day, you know what I mean? You take a little bit of risk. And so, if you think about that in the terms of sports, right? Like, we analyze all the players and every position of the field down to the minute detail because you're trying to maximize the system. And so the thinking was that it would be similar. Now, that sort of sets aside the psychology of humans, right? Like, we don't like to get beat up every day. We do like to win. Like, those high-level athletes, I think, endure that type of scrutiny and feedback because they're playing at like the highest levels. And I think there's a big difference between the people who intellectually want that, like, oh, I believe I want that, versus like getting in it every day, pushing that hard, getting that feedback, people being direct. It's very hard to simulate until you're in it. And so I think it does have some of that second order consequence you described of, like, I wouldn't say weeding out the weak. I would just say, like, weeding out the people who don't want to operate that way consistently.
And so you were on the human capital side of the equation there, and it was a very expensive human capital at Bridgewater, I'd imagine. What was it like taking a quantitative approach to people and like matching up their characteristics? Was that something that was new to you? And I guess the second derivative question is, do you agree that's a good way to look at people, or do you kind of miss the forest through the trees if you're trying to make each human like a mathematical equation?
Well, I think the mathematical equation piece overstates it slightly. In the world of, like, was it a surprise to me? Absolutely. So I started as a consultant, right? And you think about the consulting business is built to effectively make people very replaceable. Like, I learned this hard lesson early in my career where I was the business lead on this implementation, and I was going to leave to go take a job. I just wanted to get off the road. And I go to my partner, and I'm like resigning and waiting for him to beg me to stay because I'm so irreplaceable. And he sort of like nods at me and is like, cool, good luck. Picks up the phone and orders like Dave 2.0, who's on a plane and there the next day. And it was like nothing ever happened. And so, like, that's the world I grew up in. So I'm like, okay, that's how we think about people. Then you jump over to Bridgewater, where you're really trying to like deeply understand the nuances and differences. How are people's mindsets impacting them? What different abilities do they have? Where are they really spiky and sort of world class, and where are they deficient? And let's not spend tons and tons of times focusing on the deficiency. Let's build teams where like each person's spike is offsetting to the others, where 1 + 1 can equal 3. And so that part to me was, as we like run our leadership program today, like, I think that is a massive differentiator. Like, if you can truly see how different people are different and then assemble them to maximum impact on the field, I think it's a way higher ROI way to run most companies versus the consulting model of like, just throw a human in there and see what happens.
And maybe you can speak at a high level about the management program that you're running today. And I would love to learn more about the context of leaning into people's strengths, because I've also worked with managers who want me to be like an A+ at everything. And I think I've accepted at this point in life, like I'm very good at some things, and there are other things that, maybe I'm not going to be, the point guard for the Celtics, but I can do something else pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, at the high level of the program, I run it with my wife. And so I feel like we were blessed with two things. We both have worked at some enviable companies, right? Like I've worked at the world's largest hedge fund. I worked at Moody's for 10 years. PwC was that consulting company I started at. She was Goldman Sachs, Google, Compass. And we sort of came together and said, well, what are the foundational things that seem to work irrespective of environment, right? Those are very different cultures, very different industries. And we came up with like 8 foundational components to what we think is like great leadership, right? So it might be self-awareness, it might be coaching and development, clear feedback, setting, the right OKRs and aligning on expectations, problem solving in a root cause sort of way, et cetera. And so we lay all that out. And, that I think allows us to sort of both broadly appeal, but really focus people. Like I think a lot of new managers and even seasoned managers, like they get overwhelmed, right? They sort of seems like an unlimited tapestry of all the things I could do and all the problems I could solve. And so we try to like just distill it down to, if you get these 6 or 7 or 8 things right, you'll probably be ahead of 90% of the people you're competing with.
I love how you frame that up. And on the show, I usually have CFOs and operators and investors on. And I switched it up the other day. I had my buddy Alex, who was the first hire I ever made when I was an FP&A leader. And I was asking him like, hey, what was I like as a boss? Like tell the people out there. And what he said is, you put me in spots that you knew I could hit the shot, like out the gates. And then you had me take 3 steps back each time. And I think what you're saying, Dave, is like you lean into where people like feel confident in what they're good at. And then you can kind of expand that tapestry with pieces of the puzzle around it.
Absolutely. Or said differently, like one of the common questions that people will come to me, it'll be like, I had this person, they're underperforming in all these different ways. Like, how do I fix them? And the highest probability way to fix them is to actually have hired the right person in the first place. To your point, like if you go find people who have like values that are aligned to how you operate, if you have people who are excited about your mission, people who have the capabilities of the position you're putting them in on the floor, if they're walking in the door with all 3 of those, it becomes a lot easier. If you sort of hire someone who only has exactly the skills you needed yesterday and then your business changes slightly and they don't have the right character, or they're not excited about your mission, or they're not all that capable, right? Like you just can't change people at business speed. They can evolve slowly over time, but like, so you're just much better off starting from like the natural position of alignment than trying to like back into it through changing people dramatically.
I was listening to this podcast with Malcolm Gladwell, and he had this very odd perspective on hiring. And he was basically saying like, I've tried to hire all sorts of like research assistants and people to help me produce my content. And it's a total crapshoot. Like the people who I've thought absolutely nailed the interview and be perfect fits were pretty terrible. And then the other people that I thought were going to be like, okay, but I really needed them at the time and still hired them, ended up being amazing. So he was saying that it's basically like a 50-50 on how people will work out. And I was like shocked because I felt like he's like this deep thinker around like human qualities and putting people in a position to succeed. I think what I was hearing you say, Dave, is like it's very important at the outset to feel like you're aligned with the person you're hiring for, and that the objectives that you've set for them are like they're capable of at least hitting like 80% out the gate. Is that right?
Ideally, yeah. One of the key pieces, I think, it's interesting on the Malcolm Gladwell piece. There was this study that was done years ago, and I'm going to blank on exactly the school, but it was a school in California. I think I first read about it in Adam Grant's book. So speaking of another one. And what he was basically saying is this group comes in and they're like, oh, we can identify all your high potential students. Wouldn't you love to know who they are? That way you can sort of get the most out of them, to the benefit of the school, et cetera. And so the school agrees, and they go through and they run their secret process with everybody to identify the high potentials. They don't tell the kids, but they tell the teachers, like, here's all your high potentials. Like, these are going to be these are your stars. Year goes by, they come back and check, and lo and behold, they were able to accurately predict the high potential students. These were the ones who had better academic performance, had better attendance rates, et cetera. And then they revealed the methodology for identifying the high potentials, and that was random selection. They just randomly picked kids. And the thing that mattered was they told the teachers that these were the kids badged as high potential. So the teachers then changed, right? When they discovered that like a student wasn't getting it, they didn't assume the kid wasn't capable. They assumed they weren't doing a good job teaching it. They put in the extra effort. Like they knew that there was going to be a higher ROI. And so it's interesting. I wonder if with the Gladwell situation, in the places where he had high expectations, and then early on they were coming in short, if that sort of like eroded his belief in them. And in the places where he had low expectations and they started with a surprise, it massively increased his belief in them, which then created a positive reinforcing cycle.
Perception is reality in a lot of cases. And I think it's like an exercise in managing expectations with anything. Like if you're going to hire someone who's going to be punching above their weight class, like say, like for me, example, like this is my first CFO gig ever. They were taking a chance on me. I was taking a chance on them. But there's probably some really big expectations out the gate of what you're going to be able to do. But if I was stepping into like a senior director role or VP role, same performance, but maybe different expectations. So that really resonates with me about managing what you expect out of people.
It's funny. People will go through the program, we'll be like, oh, here are these 8 practices. And then inevitably at the end, we'll get asked, but like, okay, but if you only could do 3, and then we'll, I have an answer to that. And then that'll be like, but if you could only do 1.
Yeah.
Honestly, like I really believe like the number one thing you could do, any manager, any leader at any level, is to co-author and align on clear expectations. So many disagreements, so many disappointments happen because either the leader had these like expectations they thought were obvious and intuitive, but uncommunicated. And then the person did common sense things, but arrived at different conclusions and went to a different place. So like well-meaning and talented, you just ran a different race, or vice versa. Like you came in and you're like, oh, well, I was holding that I was only doing this job for 6 months and you were going to make me CFO in your mind. And yet the person who hired you never said that or agreed to it or shared that expectation or even knew that that was what you wanted. And so this idea, we can just constantly sort of realign on our expectations. If you had to pick one thing, most managers skip it and it actually prevents, like 80% of the other problems.
Dave, why do you think most managers skip it? Is it because it's uncomfortable to talk about?
I think the diagnosis will vary by manager. I think some managers don't know what they want. Like I think they're just fuzzy.
It's true. It's very true.
I think they're fuzzy and unclear. And they generally don't have like a deep visualization. A story that we'll often tell is like, when I'm setting expectations, I think the how is more important than the what. And people will sort of squint at me. In fact, when Mara and I built the program, it was the one part we argued about because she was in sales. And she was like, the expectation was like, close $25 million of business. Like no one told me how to do it. It was just like, go do it.
Here's the number, hit it.
Right. And so then an example we use to sort of tell the story is like, okay, well, picture 5-year-old soccer, right? The goal is very clear. Like, green team, put the ball in that goal. Red team, put the ball in that goal. Prevent the other team from doing the opposite. Go. And what happens? You get like 22 kids surrounding the ball and it moves around. We call it beehive soccer, magnet ball. It has lots of funny names and we've all seen it, right? That's when the what was super clear. Now, swap over to like Man City, who might be one of the most impressive teams over the last 5 years. Like Pep Guardiola's coach, like he has divided the field into like these different channels and different lanes. The expectation of every player is that there's only 2 people at any moment in any lane or any channel. And they know that they see 3, they have to move. They're trying to optimize this teeny tiny spot on the field called zone 16, where they're trying to put the ball as many times a game because that is the highest probability of scoring. It's the exact same what, but now you've got 11 players who all agree on the how. Like they have the system, they know the role, they can play the position. It is very different. And that is the difference between being, 5-year-olds chasing the ball and being like the best football team in the world.
Hey, thanks for listening. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Well, you know what I always say, maintaining compliance is never complete, which is why most security and IT teams feel like they're always in audit purgatory. I'm there right now. But there is a solution, and it's easier than you think. Escape the infinite loop by using Thoropass's compliance and audit solution. Thoropass is the only solution using AI-infused technology and in-house auditors to take your team from start to stamp without leaving the platform. As a winner of multiple G2 awards, including top awards for usability and service, your team is in good hands with Thoropass. From onboarding with dedicated experts to audits from in-house auditors who know every aspect of your framework needs. You can have complete confidence in your Thoropass compliance journey. Thoropass is the only solution to offer audits for your most needed security frameworks. I'm talking HIPAA to HITRUST and SOC 2 to ISO 27001. Woo! If you need PCI, DSS, pen tests, or any other major compliance framework, Thoropass can hook you up. With Thoropass, you never need to worry again. Relax, we fix audits. Find more at thoropass.com. That's THOROPASS.com. Tell them your boy CJ sent you. They'll hook you up. Boom. Reduce burn, extend runway, do more with less. operational efficiency. These are all catchphrases that we know all too well because of the headwinds business leaders face in today's growth environment. Growth is now a battle, not a breeze. While teams are on the front lines fighting every day for top-line yardage, there are hidden savings opportunities right beneath their feet. That's where Tropic comes into play. Their procurement platform brings order and process to a historically decentralized and chaotic business function: purchasing and supplier management. Tropic serves as the front door for procurement that your entire company will want to use. By combining intake forms, pricing benchmarks, approval workflows, and supplier management all in one place, Tropic makes savings opportunities easy to find and act on. When you pour blood, sweat, and tears into revenue growth, doesn't it make sense to protect what you have fought for? Visit tropicapp.io/metrics to learn how modern businesses are controlling spend to extend their runway. Your board will thank you. Your budget will thank you. Your bottom line will thank you. Something else that also comes up in terms of managing expectations is how a person plugs into the business as either a driver or a passenger. Or another way to put it is, are you going to be an owner of this business, or are you just going to kind of show up and be along for the ride? What does being an owner of the business practically mean from your perspective? And what are maybe some of the traits or qualities of someone who you could say this is an owner?
It's a good one. I was actually at a company offsite, did a keynote on this topic a while back, and it was interesting. So I'll give you a few of my thoughts, but yeah, I think this is also a great example of where we all think we mean the same thing and yet can have wildly divergent points of view. So, do you know the game Taboo?
Yes.
So Taboo is a game where you have one word on top that you're trying to get other people to guess, but then they give you 5 of the most descriptive words that one would use to get people to guess that, and you're not allowed to use those, right?
Yeah.
So in theory, those 5 words are the ones that would most align to that top theme. So we did this at this offsite. We did this exercise. This company has a deep, deep value of ownership to this topic, and it's built into their values. They push P&L down to individual line managers. So like you truly have ownership for like the profitability and margin of your business. They hire people in with equity from day one. Like ownership is pervasive and has been since, 8 years ago when the company started. And so at the offset, we had everyone play Taboo. We sort of had them stand up and I said, okay, your word is ownership. What are the 5 words you would sort of cross out to say like, these are so descriptive of that word ownership at this company that you can't use them? And in theory, because you're also aligned, you'll probably have pretty much the same words. And so everyone writes down their things, everyone stands up. And then I picked one of the co-founders who's constantly talking about ownership. And I said, what was one of the words from your card? And he was like, relentless. Now, I believe the word relentless is in the value statement on ownership for this company. 96% of the room sits down because they don't have that word on their card. And so we have this idea that like these big words, maybe it's ownership, maybe for other companies, it's integrity, it's honesty. Like we all think we know what it means. And yet the actual implementation and belief, it can be very different, which sort of ties back to like why it's so important to align. Some of the themes that we saw on ownership, right? One would be this idea of compounding, both positively and negatively, right? And so, we'll talk about every day when you're leading a team, every day when you're managing it, whether you're a CFO or anything else, every decision comes with 3 choices. I can execute it. I can just do it, right? I can do it and do it slightly better. Like I can find a way to improve it. Maybe our modeling gets a little bit better. Maybe our automation gets slightly better. Or I can do ways that compound, right? I can sort of constantly build on top of what we've done before. And the challenge is compounding takes more investment up front. Right? Yeah. Like I can do the work for you. We can put out the fire, but to prevent fires, I've got to materially change things. Maybe I have to train you. Maybe I have to upgrade my talent. Like I have to make these investments, and that incremental cost will pay back over time. And so owners know that. Like owners are constantly saying like, how can I make the smaller investments today? And then so maybe that's with my time. Maybe that's with who I bring in order to get the long-term compounding, because I'm going to be around for a while. I think many times employees are just like, let me get it done. Let me execute it. And then owners, I think, also know compounding goes the opposite way, which is like, as things grow, complication grows exponentially. So there's this beautiful graph that I've posted a few times online of like, when you have 3 people on a team, right, there's 3 interactions, right? Person A to person B to person C to person A. But when you start to add more people, it doesn't grow linearly in complexity. It grows, I think, geometrically, technically, but it grows exponentially, right? Once you have 10 people, it's not 10 interactions. It's something like 35. And so now as an owner, you know that every time you add a new step, add a new process, add a new person, you're dramatically increasing the complexity. And so it better well be worth the ROI of what you're going to get, because you are thinking of it as spending your own money. So anyways, that's like, I think one of the key pieces is this idea of like really understanding compounding both as it works for you and as it works against you.
I love the compounding example. That investment that compounds, I think it comes from the top, though, of people understanding in the org that you are slowing things down to speed things up later. Yeah. Because I've fallen trap where I get pushback from the top that I need this yesterday. So I'm like, screw it. I'm not going to like invest in this person to, build them up because it takes too long to get there. And like you said, if you don't invest throughout the org, each new person you bring into it is essentially a new node in the network that needs to be updated when something changes. Yeah. And if you have a bunch of people who aren't compounding at the same rate, that's where things can get completely thrown off.
Well, I think so many of these ownership concepts, they're like dualities in my mind. So like, I think one you're hitting on there is this concept of like, no. So on one hand, owners will sort of go through no because they know that it's giving them data to find the yes, right? That idea of whether you want to call it product market fit or the people who send like the 7th email to follow up to actually get the deal. And yet at the same time, they use no to focus the team, right? They're sort of saying like no to the distractions, no to these other things. And I think that also becomes part of what an owner is. Like in the compounding, there was both the positive and the negative. With no, there's both the positive and the negative. So I'm hearing that sort of implicit in what you're saying as well, right? This idea of the owners can sort of go to say like, hey, both of these things can exist at once, and I can use the judgment to know which side we're on. And I think sometimes a lot of people want it to be black or white. They want it to be on, it's either this or it's that, and often it's both.
Yeah. Something that I think of when someone says ownership is like, do you have a shared pain in what someone else is going through in the org? And it was Dan Zhang, the CFO of ClickUp, that we spoke to a couple episodes ago. And I was like, well, what is business partnering truly to you? Like if there's an FP&A team who has to go out and say, work with the HR team or the product team. She said, I want them to be owners of the business. And I was like, well, what do you mean by owner? And she said, I want them to have a shared pain in whatever that group is going through. So if you tell them that, like, say, I need you to cut costs here, or I need you to ramp up revenue here, I don't want you to just tell them that. I want you to sit down and actually feel like you own the outcome of it, not just the input or telling them what they need to do.
And how, I'm curious in that conversation, like how'd you operationalize that?
She had distinct business partners for each parts of the org. And what she had explained is basically they were measured on the success of the things that they were driving with each of those departments. So it wasn't like you could just go out and be like, all right, and you need to do this or do that. It's like you need to bring back to headquarters like what the actual result was, and were you successful in getting them to that point? It wasn't like just pass on the message and like hope it goes okay, like, mandate from the top down. It's like, no, you have to feel like you're in that department and you're trying to achieve that outcome.
And it's smart to me. Like if you had said something like the latter, which is like, oh, they're like loose partners and like they should be helpful. I'm like, you can have the value of ownership. You can hire people who sort of have that naturally, but you also have to align incentives, right? Yeah. And so that idea of like, I can't win as your partner unless you win, huge alignment of incentives. And so I love that.
I would love to talk about incentives for a minute if you're okay to jam out on that.
Sure.
How do you philosophically think about the levers that are kind of within incentives? I usually chalk it up to like you have someone's title and you have their pay, but is it more complex than that? Are there other incentives?
I think there are other incentives, and I will quibble slightly with title.
Okay.
So I would agree with you. There are monetary rewards, and the monetary rewards can be immediate via cash. They can be performance-based via bonus. They can be deferred via equity. Like lots of ways to think about monetary. And I don't know that I have tremendous amounts of new light to shed on that. I don't know. I'm super skeptical of titles in the world. Like I know how clear or unclear and how loose we were slinging them around at all the companies I've worked at. And so like, I don't put much credibility in that. The thing I want to see is I want to see like, what were the demonstrated capabilities that person carried out? Who cares what they call them?
Yeah.
And so like, to me, I think a lot of times we go through this exercise of, I get questions around like, what motivates people, which I think is ultimately sort of like what's behind the incentive question. And so like we talked about rewards, but I think part of it is people want to have impact, right? But they want to have an impact they care about. So it's like, okay, that's why I go back to mission alignment becomes very important. Impact, if you sort of think of like the work is the vehicle, Then there is like, well, does it matter to the business? And so the more and more that you're like detached, or you're supporting a group of what the business actually does, like the harder that group is to motivate, because you're not really moving the needle. Then I think there is like, well, how efficient is it to do the work? Right? You can demotivate people by, yes, the work matters, but you've made it super manual and miserable. You won't give them the good software. You won't strip things out, et cetera. And then there's like volume, right? At some point you could have really impactful, highly efficient work, and there's just too darn much of it, and you can drown people. And I think, just to sort of finish the other side, I think for them personally, the other things that you can do in terms of incentives, one of them is just growth and development. Like, a lot of people do want to grow. They want to get better. They want to gather those capabilities, because they also know those capabilities are what will translate into higher pay over time. And so you can be breathing into that. The one other was this shocking stat when we saw the study. Do you know how much more likely someone is to stay at a job if they have one friend?
No, but this is a cool question.
It's crazy. 7x.
Seven?
They're 7x
more likely.
times. Yeah, not 7%, 7x.
I thought you said 7%, 7x. That's crazy.
X. It's crazy. And so it's funny, like, we'll talk a lot of the remote companies we work with. And one of my questions when they're onboarding new people is, I'm like, do you know the 3 or 4 or 5 people who they would probably be friends with? And they like look at me like I'm crazy. And I'm like, in the old world, they'd bump into each other in the cafeteria and eventually figure it out. In the remote world, like, that's not going to happen. And so you need to be this accelerator that smashes the particles together to figure out like where that energy connects. Because if you get them one person, they're so much more likely to stick around. And think about all that investment you made to get them here. Don't lose them because they can't find a friend because they're, hanging out in their apartment in Iowa. Like,
right.
Help them.
I never thought of that as a way to motivate and retain people. That's a cool one.
I don't know. We like to be parts of communities, right?
Yeah, I guess it's just innate. And I think like something else that's innate is like wanting status. And part of that is a title. And I mean, I was talking to somebody the other week, and they said, I stayed at a company probably a year or two too long because they gave me like this crazy title, and I was only 27 at the time. Like, I wasn't a senior director like elsewhere, but I knew that if I stayed here, I would have this title and I could go somewhere else, as long as like I didn't mess it up for a year or two, and then I could be a senior director there. But like, I totally understood that I was playing this game where I was kind of taking this title inflation, and they knew that they were probably keeping me around because the company wasn't doing as well as it should have. I'm curious what you think of like that gamemanship in the career world. Do you think that people, is it bad to lean into that? Because it does happen from time to time.
For the most part, I think it's dumb. Like, for your long-term career, for a couple of reasons. One, which you hinted at, which is like, your career, while it feels very long, is actually quite short. And so why waste 18 months, 2 years of experiences that you could go get that are more aligned to what it is you want to do and the impact you want to have in the world than to sort of like wait it out for a title? The other side of it, and I've seen this go wrong a lot, is like, okay, all of a sudden, like, you wait, you get the title. In the premise, you're sort of saying like, well, is that person actually capable of doing the job? Or are they sort of giving them the title as a retention, a power status thing?
Right.
Then they go get hired at another company that expects them to be capable because of the title, and they fail. Like, they don't
they're set up to
have
fail.
the experience and capabilities. And now, like, so which is the better career trajectory? That you like waited around to become a CFO and then went and failed at your first real crack at it?
Right.
Or you went and did the experiences you needed to get to actually become a credible CFO? Like, you probably get to the same place in roughly the same amount of time. One is just far more like proactive and engaging, and one is sort of like gaming the system. Like, you're looking for the hack, and like, the hacks always come back to bite you.
And I think we saw the hacks coming back to bite people in like 2020, 2021, where people were literally jumping jobs like every 6 to 8 months sometimes, especially on like the product managers that you'd see on TikTok, for like, they'd get 20 grand more each time. But then like layoffs come around, and you can kind of see, like, we all knew the pendulum was swinging probably too far in one direction. It's going to come back around.
100%. It's funny. Oftentimes we'll talk about ownership, just back to that topic for a second, because it became very visceral for me. Like, I had a corporate career for 20 plus years. And so like, yeah, I act like an owner, but I was never really an owner. Now I have my own business, right? It's like my wife and I, like, that's the whole thing. And I'm like, oh, I'm not acting like an owner. Like, I'm actually the owner, like, if we don't do it, it doesn't happen. If we don't sell the next, B2B client, or if we don't run the next cohort, like, we don't get paid. And so one of the things that really helped me is to go back fundamentally to realize, like, if you want to act like an owner, you sort of have to think like, every day I am convincing someone to give me $1. because of something that I am going to provide them. And then my job is to provide back value in excess of that dollar, right? And so whether that is me, coaching an executive or teaching a program, like if they give me $1, I want to give them 5 or 10 or 25, right? And that way they want to give me more dollars. I have a sustainable business. They want to tell their friends because like, holy cow, look at that value. I have a growing business. And the same is true as if you're an internal person, right? Like someone has hired you to be, like you will have hired an FP&A analyst and you've decided they get, like here's $1. I need them to produce more than that dollar's worth of value for the business or it's not worth it.
Yeah.
And you can find someone who can. And so that idea of if you're like running up how much you get paid and not actually running up your capabilities to deliver value, you're putting that in jeopardy because now they're paying $1 to get 80 cents. And of course you're a mark.
Okay, I want to riff on this whole concept of value here. So I was having beers with my buddy, and he's the CFO at a recruiting business. And recruiters are essentially salespeople, right? They have like a goal of how many people they need to book each year. And so what I want to talk about is like the idea of someone providing a ton of value, but they're also kind of like a jackass and detrimental to the business. And so what he was telling me is this guy, basically he would book like over $4 million a year in like recruiting fees. Like he was by far like 200% better than the next guy, but he would get absolutely trashed at company parties. One time they caught him doing drugs at like an offsite, and he's just like a total whack job. But the guy brings down like way more business than anybody else. So I have a question, like if someone is bringing so much like monetary business value on paper, but they don't really stand for everything else that you're doing in the org, like, can you have a Dennis Rodman essentially on a team? Can you have one guy as long as he pulls down 20 rebounds a night? Just one of those guys? Or is it like totally going to blow up the org in the long run?
I can give you two different perspectives. I'll give you mine and I can give you Phil Jackson's. Like Phil Jackson got interviewed about this a lot. What he said was like, well, you allow Dennis Rodman to be like, do all these things and create all these distractions. And he seems to have his own set of rules. Like, does everybody on the team get their own set of rules? And he was like, well, no. He's like, I can't have a team of Dennis Rodmans. I can have a team with a Dennis Rodman. And I can mostly have a team of a Dennis Rodman because I also have a Michael Jordan. And that he had both a coach with a system and he had an alpha player who sort of like ran things on the court who would also keep that in line. You know what I mean? And so like it would drift to a level, but it wouldn't drift to like, call it toxic. Do you know what I mean? It might be like eccentric, but it wouldn't be toxic. Anyways, so like I do like sports for these analogies, but like I'm probably a couple clicks further away from Phil Jackson. Take that for what it's worth. He's probably got a little bit better track record in his domain. I don't think you can tolerate it. If you are trying to build something long-term and sustainable, right? If you have a mission and you've identified the values necessary to win that mission, which is hard enough in the first place, then you cannot have people and tolerate people who are running counter to those values because they spread. There's a couple great quotes around culture, right? There's one which is like Ben Horowitz, right? His book title, like what you do is who you are. So you can say all the things you want, but like what you actually do is the culture. And so if that is going to be within your organization, like you can say that you want, kindness and congeniality, or you want partnership and collaboration and all the great words we use. But if you tolerate people like getting, super drunk and doing crazy things and whatever else, then like, that's your culture. Restaurateur Danny Meyer has my other favorite definition.
Oh, yeah.
His version of culture is it's the sum of everything you celebrate minus everything you tolerate. Right? And so this would be the minus side. Yeah, it's a good one, right? I was like, well, it was one of the more like memorable ones that I've heard.
There are varying levels of it though, too, Dave. So I'll give you an example. We had like a company all hands where we basically invited everybody to the company to come and meet for 3 days, and we gave presentations and stuff. But there'd be breaks in between, and there was like coffee from the hotel there. And the head of accounting had said in the Slack channel, like, hey, a bunch of receipts keep coming back where people are leaving and expensing like all these Starbucks runs. So it's like a very minor thing. And the head of sales, like big dog, goes out and buys coffee for his team, comes back right after. And she walks right up to him, like ballsy move. And she's like, hey, what's the deal with this? Like, you shouldn't have expensed this. And now I'm like, oh, I'm going to have to like go through like patching this up. And I think I messed up. I said to the head of accounting, because the head of sales was like, what's her deal? Like, I can expense this. Like, I get it, but is it that big of a deal? And I kind of said to her, hey, I know that we have one rule for everybody, but with him, like, it's not that big of a deal. And looking back at it, I think like I gave her the wrong impression of how like I really feel about the company and saying there are two sets of roles. But at the end of the day, I'm like, it was a $12 coffee expense. Is it that big of a deal?
It really depends on the context and the culture. Like on one, the argument I could make against your approach is not the $12 coffee. It's the 4 people who got the $12 coffee that now know that like, well, rules are like subjective. You know, like they kind of apply or they kind of don't. It's also the fact that like you have a leader working within a company that has a policy that he doesn't believe in. And so I'm a little bit like, the expectation I would have of someone, you know, leading a function is they either fight through to make the policy be sensible, to say like, this is nonsense. Like we can't operate this way. Like the baseline should be at least a $50 expense, or like, no, for anything that brings joy to our team and it's under this dial, like that's the exception, and we're, you know, there's no debating it. And so to some degree, it's like you're all tolerating these signals that now you've taken away what was good, which was clarity. Like that the whole point of policy
there was clarity,
like, really,
and it was probably overly rigid clarity, to be honest.
Great, but then fix that.
Yeah,
right.
And that's on me.
Yeah, good. There you go. This is why I go to this place where I'm like, did you not understand the policy, or did you just disagree with it and not handle that well? Right? It sounds like in this case, it's in that I disagreed with it and now I just didn't handle it well. Well, great. I can't have you not handling it in that way. It has all these ripple effects.
Right.
So let's either fix the policy or the coffee's out on the table.
It's a microcosm of like a larger thing. Like I know people probably listening, like, who gives a shit? Like it's a $12 coffee expense. But then you have somebody who has Starbucks on the table. It's like, well, that team gets to go because they're on the sales team, and it does have a ripple effect.
It does. And then, you know, well, those sales team, well, I just upgraded Economy Plus, or I upgraded First Class. Like, I know it's not in the policy, but like, you know, it's $50.
Yeah.
And I could be way more productive on the flight.
I want to switch gears a bit. And so there was a quote that struck me. I don't know if you tweeted it or it was on your newsletter, which I love to read. But you say type A managers are notorious for the following statement: "That's okay, I'll do it." What's the danger in that statement? And I'm asking for a friend who happens to be me, who's said that over 100 times in his career.
Well, the good news is if we were breaking the room into people who've said that at some point in their career or not, it'd be a very one-sided room. Like we've all done it. I bring up that statement because I think there's 3 pieces of it that make it very dangerous. The first is, that's okay. Usually you don't mean it. Usually you're like taking something back from someone that you've delegated because it wasn't good enough. And so saying that's okay, you're not being clear. You're not saying like, actually, you know, you didn't hit the deadline, you missed the mark, et cetera. So that's part 1. Part 2 is right? That is the entire system, right, is about you playing your position. The reason you set expectations, the reason you've delegated work, the reason you've brought in people who are different than you and more capable in certain ways is so you can do that. Once you go to you take it back, right? So you're undoing the system you've invested in. And then the last one is back to that compounding idea, right? Which is do it, right? Like you could coach them, you could train them, you could give them feedback. All of these things sort of keep the work where it belongs and allows them to understand how they came up short and do it better next time. When you just do it, they don't learn a damn thing.
I think it goes back to that compounding we talked about earlier. Whenever you say that's okay, I'll do it, you're robbing them of that ability to compound basically new skills.
And you're robbing yourself of your system compounding so it can have more impact. Like it's lose-lose. You both lose. The corollary or the cousin to that's okay, I'll do it. Probably the most reprinted Harvard case study ever is this idea about the monkeys.
Yeah.
And so it's the idea that your team is secretly delegating work back to you, right? And so this happens to me all the time. Someone's like, oh, you know, hey, Dave, just put together a draft of this proposal. You just want to get your eyes on it, you know? And then it's like, oh, okay, you know what? I can't focus on that right now. Just leave it on my desk. Or, you know, now in the electronic world, it's in my inbox. So what just happened? Like they delegated work to me. Like I'm now the bottleneck. It's sitting on me. And if I don't get back to them in like a day and they're still trying to achieve their goals, now they start managing me. They're looking for like the status report. Like, hey, Dave, how are we doing on that proposal review? And like somehow we've inverted the whole thing. And it's funny, you remind people that all you have to do is like say no. And the easy way to say no is like, well, what do you propose? Like, okay, here's the proposal you want me to review. Do I need to review it or do you think it's good? Is there specific things you like need me to engage on? Or, you know, how much damage could we do if you just send it? All of a sudden, it's like keeping the work where it is. And so the case study uses this like very visceral monkey, right? It's like they come in and they like put the monkey on your desk or put it on your back and then they leave. And so you sort of imagine this like office filling up with monkeys. I just love that because it's like, no. When you see the monkey coming, you got to keep it with them.
I had like 3 monkeys land on my back and desk the other day. One of them was somebody had like this complicated contract And like, I'm the CFO. I do have to read it and figure it out. But they were like, hey, this has been like a mess. We've been going back and forth, but we do need to get this over the line. Can you give me your thoughts on this? I'm like, so you just drop like a 40-page contract that's pretty complicated on my desk. And now I have to figure it out. And then they emailed me last night. They're like, hey, any thoughts on this yet? I was like, holy shit, how did this become like my thing?
Yep. Versus just go back, like play that, be like, actually, yes, I can. But first, what I need you to do is, you said you've been going back and forth. What specifically have you been going back and forth on? Can you highlight for me in the contract the specific language that you're hung up on? And if I didn't exist, what would you recommend we do?
That's what I should have said, but I was being pretty lazy at the time. And I said, I'll take a look. And it backfired. Now I'm like, I'm having this aha moment in real time of what I did to myself.
Well, what I love about it is like what I just did took 20 seconds. What you did took 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Not to mention the like fact that you're lamenting it, the fact that you probably had to like decide where it stacks in the priorities. All of a sudden, like the actual work might have been 20 or 30 minutes. Then you've got this surrounding friction on it. Now it's an hour task. And
I still haven't read the contract, by the way.
Right.
But I have this like low burning anxiety that I have to do it later.
Well, you're probably going to email in your inbox asking where you're at.
Yeah. All right. So maybe gearing towards a close here. I got one more point that was really powerful just looking at your background and stuff you've written about. And you said, at one point in my career, I inverted my one-on-one meetings. I made it their meeting instead of mine, and it was a complete game changer. I suffer from suffocating under the weight of way too many one-on-one meetings. I need some advice here.
So when you say you're suffocating under the weight of the one-on-ones, like what's creating the weight and how do you handle it?
So I feel like I go to them and people expect me to give them a list of either what I've been working on or ask them for what they've been working on. And I think I've been too, not aggressive, but too proactive in like showing up to the one-on-one meetings prepared. So now I feel like I'm the one who shows up each time with like an agenda in them.
Yeah.
And it may be that like I'm not leaving enough time for them to like fill the silence in the room, but I'm worried about them not being productive. So I feel like I'm looking at the one-on-ones on my calendar and like coming to each one with a lot.
And do you ever cancel them because of that weight?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I do.
You're literally suffering from exactly the same thing that was killing me. Like at one point we had done a reorg and I think I woke up one day with like 15 direct reports. Now I knew that wasn't sustainable. I needed to fix it, but for the near term, it wasn't clear what to do. So I had to manage 15 people and 15 agendas, 15 half-hour meetings, like I couldn't do the work. And so then who did I cancel on? I canceled on my best people. I'm like, well, I already know you and I know you've got it and there's probably no problems. And it's like upside down. And so out of like effectively desperation, I was like, this meeting's your meeting now. Like we're aligned on the work you should be doing. And so I need you to come prepared to answer 5 questions. And in fact, let's have a standard template. But outside of that, this is your meeting. Like you prioritize the agenda topics. Instead of you thinking of yourself as like a pawn on my chessboard, you be the chess master and like move me around wherever you need me to be the most impactful. And so we agreed on, the 5 questions were effectively like, what are your goals? How's it going? So how it going was very much like both metrics and or wins and losses. What are the problems? Because I don't expect things to be perfect. If we're doing aggressive, game-changing, impactful things, like it's not going to be problem-free. But what I need to know is that they know the problems. Do they have solutions to the problems? Are the solutions on track to be implemented? And then the last question was about if they had teams, like how are the people on their team? Like, are they engaged? Are they at risk of leaving? Are the boxes filled? And so I'm like, these are the questions I need to know in our one-on-ones. That said, if you sort of keep that dashboard up to date, on the top left of my template, it would just be, what are all the topics you want to hit? And we'll go through your topics first. By the way, on the right, here are the questions I have either based on what I see on the dashboard or things I know that are going on in the business. And so super lightweight for me, right? Like it's their meeting, it's their agenda, like they're the one who has to maximize it. And then I just get to ask questions, right? I get to support them. I get to enable, I get to remove problems. I get to coach and develop. I get to give feedback. So much higher value than effectively when it's flipped the other way. Usually the place you devolve to is like a status meeting. Like, tell me what's going on.
Yeah. And those are the worst.
They're the worst. And they hate them and you hate them. And you had to do work to have meetings you both hate. The inversion thing is like probably the single thing that like managers go through our program. They're like, they go try it. And we get notes like once a week being like, this changed everything.
Dave, thank you for that super tactical advice. That's like the inside baseball that people come to this pod to get. So I appreciate you sharing it with us. This was an awesome jam session. And where can people find you if they want more Dave Kline?
Probably two easiest places. We've got a newsletter, which is the MGMT Playbook, so that you can find that on top of any of my social
Active
profiles.
subscriber right here.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, the two places where I'm on LinkedIn a lot and I'm on Twitter. So LinkedIn, it's just Dave Kline. On Twitter, it's Kline II.
This podcast was me, like, selfishly just trying to interview someone who would make me better at my job. And I actually find that those ones tend to do the best because other people are in the same kind of areas of life as me. So thanks for joining me, Dave.
Thanks for having me. It was great.
Roll the credits, producer Natalie. Run the Numbers is part of the Turpentine Podcast Network. It is produced by Natalie Torin and edited by Justin Golden. Album artwork by Some AI Thing. Yelling and intro by Fat Joe. If you made it this far, please give us 5 stars. I really need this.